You mean when I was escorted out of the building? No, it wasn't like that.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm here with Patty McCord, of course, and our guest today, Nirav Tolia, who both of us have known for, years now.
Two of my favorite people.
Thank you.
And Texan, you would say, since he was knee-high to a pissant.
Yes. And we all have Texas in common now because I now live here. Nirav.
Patty, you're not from Texas, are you?
Oh, honey, yeah. Oh,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
All
and
right.
so, Nirav, you're spending time between Dallas and San Francisco, I think.
I grew up in Odessa, Texas. And so
Aw.
I'm not one of those Californians who just up and left and went to Texas at some point. My entire family, my parents, my only sibling, they all live in Dallas. And so post-COVID, my wife and I took our three boys and we moved to Dallas, where we've been for the last 3 years. But as you said, since coming back to Nextdoor, I've spent a lot of time in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yes. And we'll just give a little bit of background on you, Nirav. Like, I don't know, would you call yourself a serial founder or serial
Can you be
entrepreneur?
serial if it's the same company?
I'm not a serial killer, but I'm a serial entrepreneur. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I've
So it was
started
like-
three.
Shopping.com was the
Mhm.
first. Then it was
Opinions was the first, which became shopping.com, which was bought by eBay.
Right.
And then
for
the second
a
company,
lot of money.
some money, maybe
Mhm.
not as much as I thought it was worth,
Of
but
course, never
something
is.
that they thought was worth. And then I started a company called Fanbase, which was
Right.
a massive failure. And that led to the creation of Nextdoor.
Okay. And we're going to talk a lot today about your journey as a leader and a founder and the learnings that you've had. I want you to take us back to Nextdoor and you're leaving, or I don't know, being
You mean when I
asked
was
to leave?
escorted out of the building? No, it wasn't like that.
Well, let's
but-
go back before then. So, Nirav, we were reminiscing about both of us visiting Nextdoor in the first building where the cubicle dividers were doors.
Yep.
Back
I
in-
mean, look, it was a real startup. And let me
I
just say,
know.
first of all, I'm so honored to be with you two. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is I have always had so much respect for the function that was formerly called HR. And now what do we call it? People, talent, human capital, whatever it is. I've always been someone who believes that the strength of these companies is the people. And so to be around folks who've spent their entire careers trying to understand how to give those people the best environment in which to create amazing things, I've just always been a true believer. And so, Patty, you've been an amazing mentor. I've always loved everything that you've done, your book, obviously the manifesto, the slide deck, the thing that you're really famous for. And then Jessica was so lucky to have a couple of board members at Nextdoor that were also board members at Netflix.
Mhm.
And so not only did they know Patty really well, they knew you, Jessica. And so, yes, I did try to hire you multiple times. You did say no multiple times, but it's a thrill to have gotten to know both of you. Patty, we'll get to this, I'm sure, in the course of this, but in some of my darkest moments at Nextdoor, I leaned on you, which I really appreciate. And so I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be on the show. And just back to your question, I mean, look, Nextdoor is a real startup. And so here we are 14 years later, but going back to the very beginning, I feel so blessed to have gone to Stanford for college because I never thought I would be working in technology. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I didn't know anything about the field or any of that.
But I mean, like you did, like, well, tell us a little bit about that. So you're in Odessa, but then you end up at Stanford and maybe an unlikely place for you to be. I'm not sure.
I would say that it's one of the first times in my life that I experienced enough adversity that it changed the direction of my life in a way that initially was kind of difficult and challenging, but ultimately was a real blessing. So both my parents are Indian immigrants, physicians, and I always wanted to be a surgeon like my dad. That was my dream growing up. And I was really lucky to get into Stanford. I think I may have been the first person from my high school to even apply to Stanford.
Wow.
So that
Yeah.
kind of tells you, how different a world it was. But I got to Stanford and immediately everyone around me was smarter, harder working, had come from better schooling. And so I was a kind of a fish out of water. And after having succeeded a lot in high school, I wasn't succeeding a lot in college. And in particular, I wasn't succeeding as a pre-med. And so serendipitously, because of that failure, frankly, of not being able to follow my dad's footsteps, the thing that I could do, because anyone could back then, it was the creation of the internet. And I was lucky enough to meet the folks who started Yahoo, and I was hired as an early employee, and my job title was surfing Yahoo. I was in charge of taking the websites that were being submitted to the Yahoo directory and putting them into the correct categories, and feel really lucky that I was hired, but I didn't have a technical background. I didn't have a business background. I didn't have an entrepreneurial background. But being in Silicon Valley during that time and being in a company like Yahoo, as long as you have your eyes open, your ears open, you're willing to learn, it's just an incredible hotbed of information and expertise. And so after 3 years at Yahoo, I thought, oh, this doesn't look that hard. I mean, remember, I joined Yahoo, sub 100 employees. By the time I left 3 years later, I think there were probably over 10,000. When I joined, the valuation of the company was probably a couple $100 million. It had gone to $100 billion, right? I mean, there wasn't a day I walked into Yahoo where the numbers weren't up and to the right. You can just imagine. You remember what it felt like. That was 96,
totally.
97, 98, 99.
Yeah, and then,
right?
as time went on at Yahoo, Jessica will remember this. One of the things we used to do when we recruited was every time Yahoo got a new CEO, it's like, go in and get the tech people. Right? It's like, they don't know who they work for at least 6 months. So like, go snatch them, right? We just go in there and surgically remove people from Yahoo.
Well, then it got sad though, because then we didn't want it. Those that had stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed, it was like,
Well, the amazing thing about our industry is, I mean, when I worked at Yahoo, if I wore my Yahoo t-shirt and walked down University Avenue in Palo Alto, I would be mobbed. And people would say what they say about Netflix today. I love Yahoo. I use it all the time. It's amazing. Now if I wore a Yahoo t-shirt, I don't think a lot of people would even know what it meant.
But they certainly would.
If you're old enough.
But I was thinking about Nextdoor as kind of the same thing at this point. A lot is said about Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and there's all this mythology around it. But that moment, that moment when you're wearing your t-shirt and somebody comes up and says, I use your product and I love it. I was thinking about this when I was thinking about talking to you today. I love now in my life, because my early tech career was geek to geek stuff, right? And I love the B2C world, right? Where normal people use your product and they don't think about how you got there, how hard it was, how technical it was. It's just a really useful thing to talk about how come you don't pick up your poop in the front yard.
Look, the truth is, I mean, and you articulated it well, that feeling,
that thrill
of creating something with your own hands that people love, that they truly love. If you have that in an early age, I think you seek it for the rest of your career.
Absolutely.
So
and
you're
we
chasing it.
joke.
Yeah.
I mean, we joke at Nextdoor. I mean, it started with Nextdoor and people did love it. And I wouldn't have needed to come back if they still loved it. And internally we say now 100 million people are members of Nextdoor. And so you ask people, hey, what do you think of Nextdoor? And they say, oh yeah, I'm a member. And then you hear a but. Right. And so that's the thing that we need to change. But that idea that your hands can result in something that people know, and it's not from a business context. It has nothing to do with ego, right?
No, it's that. And it's not just your hands. I mean, it's the hands of the team and everybody you've touched, right? Jessica and I are a great example. My whole life is with alumni now. I mean, my very best friends are alumni, and everybody's part of it, no matter when they are, which is a great segue, I think, to, and then you were, and then you weren't.
Yeah. Well, take us back to that moment where you are leaving Nextdoor and you have put in all this work and it was your baby. And what happens? Tell us the story.
Well, the theme that I would come back to over and over again, whether it was what I talked about being at Stanford and just kind of lucking into technology, or even being at Nextdoor, I started the company in the summer of 2010. It was not easy to start the company. We were coming off of a failed company, right? So that's another example of this theme of failure leading to learning and growth and hopefully something better. And as I tell people, summer of 2010, it's not like you put on your agenda at 10 a.m., come up with $1 billion idea, right? It's just not the way it works, right? So there's a lot of iteration, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of growth. And ultimately, we have an idea that we not only think has business potential, we truly believe it has human potential, which was important for us and something that got us up in the morning. And it's maybe a little bit overused now to say purpose and things like that. It kind of sounds like Tom Sawyer or something that's a little cheesy. But in reality, if you can build a great business and you can make people feel good for using your product along the way, that's a real pleasure. It's not something that everyone has the opportunity to do. So I start the company and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, how lucky am I to be the founder, one of the co-founders of this thing, to be the CEO, and it's going really well. And 2017, so 7 years after we started the company, we were not performing as well as we probably should have been, given the potential of the company. And as we got into 2018, it increasingly became clear that I was not scaling as a leader. And what does that mean? I mean, I didn't really know what it meant, but you could see it in the company. The culture wasn't as strong. The product wasn't as well defined. The plans for how we would grow were not clicking the way they did in the early years. And so you were kind enough, Jessica, to say when you left, I mean, the reality, and I said this really to the entire company when I came back to Nextdoor. Thankfully, it was my choice to come back because it wasn't really my choice to leave. And leaving was not something that I ever thought I would do. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, even as a CEO, I don't think you're really thinking about what if this doesn't work out.
Yeah.
You're only thinking about what if it works out.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, was it just, I mean, obviously you knew signs were there, with the product, with the culture. But I mean, were you surprised by this decision with the board or?
Surprised is probably a huge understatement. When this kind of thing happens, your entire world is destroyed.
Yeah.
Because your identity is tied to this job. And so it doesn't happen in one fell swoop, right? It's a little bit like I joke and say success is 999 failures leading to one resounding victory, right? I think realizing that you're not the right person for the job, it's 1,000 little things that ultimately lead to this realization.
Oh man, I hear you. Now all of a sudden I can feel you, man.
Yeah.
Well, you did feel me, Patty, because at one point.
But I mean, I did the same thing too. I remember for years people would say, why did you leave? And I'd be so tender about it. I would say, do you tell everybody, the obtuse to your breakup story? So why'd you get divorced? What happened? Did he yell at you? Was there, what were you wearing? Did you cry? I mean, people would ask me that, like, did you cry? I'm like, this is none of your business. I mean, ew. But that, it just, even though
it hurts.
Right?
Well, but you don't know, right? I mean, one of the board members said, call Patty, ask her for help. That was literally what I got. I stepped down in July of 2018. In May of 2018, I got on the phone with Patty. Yeah. And Patty said, wow, I've talked with your board. You're in a tough spot. This is not going to be easy. Let's see if we can get you some help. I don't know what's going to happen. Right. And so even hearing that, remember, this is not a company that I came into. Right. It's a company that I created.
Yeah.
This is not a board that I inherited. It's a board that I chose.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it feels a little bit more like a family at that point. And, this gets to all the Netflix stuff about we're not a family, right? Like we're a team.
Yep.
And you realize that it's a business. It's a business. And if you don't perform, and the other thing you realize, and I would love for people listening to take this away, sometimes even if you're getting all the right advice, even if you have all the resources at your disposal, even if you have the best CEO coach, until you fall down, until you fail, your ears aren't really open. Your eyes aren't really seeing what's going on. And so when I reflect a little bit, I remember going through this and realizing really in many ways for the first time, all the areas where I needed to grow. And I don't consider myself an incredibly unself-aware human being, but in that moment, I just realized how little I did know.
What were some of the things that you reflected on and were like, okay, gosh, I need to know this. I need
The
to learn
biggest thing, and this is what I've tried now to really work on as I've come back, the single biggest thing, and this is something that I think needs to be said because it's certainly something that's experienced by leaders. Stress can make us the worst versions of ourselves. Stress, if it's not controlled, if it's not managed, if it's not really something that you get on the right side of, stress will bring us all to our knees. And in my case, the stress not only brought me to my knees, it made me the worst version of a leader, the worst version of a teammate, the worst version of a father, the worst version of a husband, the worst version of a friend. And so 20 years of being a CEO at that point, right? Having that pressure, being in that vice, feeling like I was going to get snapped at any moment, right? And just the realization that I had never figured out how to handle that. And it's not like I didn't have CEO coaches, right? We were talking about the fact that I was lucky enough to be one of Bill Campbell's first mentees. Bill Campbell, the $1 trillion coach that everyone talks about in Silicon Valley. I had Fred Kaufman, an incredible CEO coach who would coach Sheryl Sandberg and Jeff Weiner. And so I had all the resources. I had a world-class board. I could call Patty. She was on my speed dial, right? And so again, it's not that I didn't have the resources, but the self-growth of understanding, what does stress do to me? It's not in a textbook that you can read. It's not in some case study that you're aware of, right? It's what does stress do to me? And the other thing I realized, and I continue to realize this, is when you're the CEO, there's a power dynamic between you and the rest of the team that makes it very difficult for them to give you real feedback.
Oh, yeah.
They don't tell you the truth.
Well, I mean, they're always thinking like, what does he want to hear? Right. Versus what does he need to hear?
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of winds that blow that make that. For one thing, especially then, it's venerated. Oh, you must have the God gene.
Yeah.
Right. You because you're the CEO. It's like nobody ever says, how did you get there? How do you deserve it? What did you do? What have you? It's just like once you're there, you're godlike. And the second one, since Jessica and I have spent our whole lives being literally that person. Right. Who, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would say to Reed, I know what you said.
Yeah.
I was there in the room. You are literally correct. Those are, in fact, the words that you use. So once again, if we're playing debate game, you win. Do you want to know what they heard?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so that translation, and I would say from all the CEOs I've worked with, and we talked about this a little beforehand, you're absolutely right. I mean, nobody can coach you to not fall down if they catch you every time you trip.
You kind of got to feel the pain.
Yeah, sometimes you got to get up and go, fuck, that hurt.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know how hot the stove is. Yeah, right. Everybody can tell you it's hot. You've got to touch that stove and learn yourself.
It's very true, and we don't often give ourselves the grace to do it. Right. Yeah. And the stakes are high. The stakes are high.
To be fair, nor does anybody else. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
not in that role. Right.
Not in that role. And
Yeah.
I think that, to give you some credit, every single CEO I've ever worked with, and it's been lots since Netflix, and so has Jessica, has had to come to that realization that the people that work for you think the words that flow from your lips are little golden commands, instead of half the time opinions or just a brain fart, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, maybe we should change the font. And then the next day, like I get a team of 40 people working on changing the font because
I said this one little thing.
Well, and leaders are constantly iterating.
Yeah.
And so the dangerous thing about taking what a CEO says as gospel.
Right.
Yeah.
So many times, like we do with products, I am iterating.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
seeing what kind of response am I going to get?
Right,
How's
right.
it going to land?
Yeah,
Does
yeah,
it
yeah.
make sense? Is it resonating? And
Right.
when they don't realize that framing, or really more to the point, when I don't provide that framing, things can go awry. So even when you're talking, you're not communicating.
Right. And time, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't understand why they don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, I was very explicit about that. I'm like, I know you were at our executive team meeting last week. However, the other 1,000 people heard you say the complete opposite thing at the company meeting 4 months ago, when the last time they heard your voice was.
Yeah. No, I was talking to a CEO just a couple days ago who was like, I realized how much chaos I was causing in the organization because I would get excited about things or I would be concerned about something. And I would just think I'd be having a conversation with someone. But then these teams would be formed and people would be off doing things because I was either concerned or excited. And he's like, I never realized what a chaos maker I was.
Jessica, you won't remember this, but when I was interviewing you, and I'll never forget this, you told me about this thing called the CEO tale, the tale of a CEO. I don't know if you remember it, but the point you were making was very similar to what you just said, which is you said most CEOs don't realize that they have these long, powerful tails.
Yeah.
And when they swing the tail without even knowing it,
Right. Because they're
they
happy.
can level.
Yeah.
They can be happy. They can be sad. They can just be nothing.
Yeah.
But the tail leaves a swath of destruction in its wake, right? And I'll never forget that because the idea that if I walk into the office and I have a frown on my face, people are worried all of a sudden.
Yeah.
They're wondering what's wrong. I just had, kind of a rotten egg for breakfast.
Yeah,
It was no
right.
big deal.
Yeah.
Right? But you're right. I mean, I think the impact and understanding really that you have that impact, but then there are places where you can iterate and you can experiment and you can toggle back and forth, right? But when do you do what? Unfortunately, you don't realize that until you stand up in front of 1,000 people at an all hands and you realize that's probably not the right place to iterate. That's where you got to be crisp.
We were thinking we'd go left, but I don't know. Right?
Maybe right.
What do you guys think?
Okay, all right. We're getting off to so you're learning this. That you're getting let go. You have to leave. You kind of have the reflections, and then what happens?
Well, I realized that the issue that was getting in the way of me being the most effective CEO for Nextdoor were also issues that were going to show up in every part of my life. And so this became a much bigger thing for me than you have to work on this part of your career ambition, right? It was much more what kind of person do I want to be? At the same time, I'm a very optimistic, glass half full human being. And so I thought to myself, okay, this may not have been exactly my choice, but how am I going to learn from this and how am I going to use this to my advantage? And so I took it as this is an awesome opportunity to do completely different things. And so my wife and I did something crazy. She quit her job and we took our 3 young kids who were ages 6, 4, and 2, and we moved to Florence, Italy. We had the opportunity to have some flexibility and to do something like a sabbatical that we could never have done before. And so we were in Italy on and off for 2 years. COVID hit in the middle of that. So we came back, then we went back to Italy. The second year in Italy was magical. There were no tourists. I then became the executive chairman of a very large venture capital firm that had funded Nextdoor. So I became an investor trying to help CEOs avoid a lot of the potholes that I had stepped in. I joined 11 boards. And then ultimately, when we were coming back from Italy to the United States, we decided to move to Dallas because that's where my entire family is, my parents, my only sibling, his family. And we wanted our kids, who at that point were, I think, maybe 11, 9, and 7, we wanted them to be around their grandparents. So I lived a lot of life. And interestingly, I never thought I would be a CEO again.
Like,
it wasn't
did you
something I
want to?
wanted.
No?
No, it wasn't something that I didn't want. I wasn't resentful. I didn't feel like, oh, I had to leave Nextdoor. I hope it fails so I can come back. Like I had none of that.
Yeah.
I had none of that. I thought to myself, what an amazing run. And I still was part of creating this thing. I hope it's massively successful. It was on its way to an IPO. And by the way, what else am I going to learn and do in my life? And not being an operator, not being a CEO, I can focus on what I think is the most important startup of them all, which is our family.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I were really co-parenting the kids. So I think what's interesting about my journey as I reflect on it now, when I left Nextdoor, I never had this impulse of, oh, I need to learn something so that I don't make the same mistakes again. Or I can't wait to show them that I can do better next time, right? None of that was driving any motivation. The motivation was, what can I learn from this to make me a better person? And what are the interesting things that I can do? Because now I'm kind of free, right? The one thing about being a CEO of one of these companies is it's a huge commitment, right?
Yeah,
you're not free. And so, Jessica, as you know, I really tortured myself before I came back. I mean, I didn't know if it were the right thing for me to come back and be a CEO.
Who called you? You get a call. What happened?
I'm on the board, as Patty said. I love the company. I really wanted the company to succeed. I completely backed and supported Sarah Fryer, who we had hired to be the CEO. And it just wasn't working. And so for a while, I thought, okay, well, if I have some great ideas on how to make it work, I better share them. It's not like I'm trying to not tell them what I think needs to be right. But honestly, I was out of Nextdoor. I mean, I was there as a board member, but I was looking at AI companies to invest in. I was living abroad. I was trying to raise my kids the right way. I mean, my mind was in non-Nextdoor places for the first time in a long time. So I didn't know how to fix the company. And so I wasn't really that active in trying to turn it around. Ultimately, there was a moment where it became clear that we probably needed to transform leadership. That was the direction that we needed to go in. And so my wife and I started thinking about it, knowing that the company's in San Francisco and has an office in New York as well. And we're living in Dallas. And we've created this life where I'm close to my parents. I'm taking my kids to school in the morning. I value my flexibility. I'm on 11 boards of other companies, right? I mean, it's not like I was just sitting on the sidelines waiting to go back in, right? And we talked about it, and we both decided, as important as it would be to go back to Nextdoor, both financially as well as just psychologically, we can't upend our life and do it. Like the kids are very happy. They're settled. We're happy. We're settled. And so we decided not to do it. And a couple months later, it was very clear that Nextdoor could have actually ended in a really bad place. And so as I tell people, if your kid calls you from jail, you're not happy that your kid's in jail, but you take the call and you go pick up the kid, right?
Yeah,
and so it's not like it was this great situation in terms of you're walking into a company that's firing on all cylinders and it's the company's across the street so you can walk to work, right?
Yeah.
It was the opposite.
Your pedestal's ready. Would you like to come sit there on the throne again?
It was a turnaround. It has required in the last 30 weeks, I've traveled 26 of those 30 weeks. And so it was going to require tremendous personal sacrifice, but I love this company. I love this company.
It's your kid.
And I wanted to succeed badly, not just for myself, but for the world. And so I came back not really knowing, but as I then reflected, I thought to myself, you know what, if I do come back, I need to be the best possible CEO that I can be. I can't be that old CEO.
Yeah.
That old CEO is not going to get it done, right?
Yeah.
I need to be better. I need to be better for the people that are part of the company. I need to be better for our users. I need to be better for our customers, right? And so that was kind of a cool challenge. And I wrote the board an email on the 6-month anniversary of me coming back. This was just a month ago. And I said, I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity, the privilege to come back and be the CEO of this company. There are 3 things that I realize now give me so much energy and give me so much excitement and give me so much fulfillment about being in this job. And those 3 things are, number 1, I believe deeply in the mission of the company. Local community and building local community is something that I care about outside of business. It's just who I am. It is Odessa, Texas. It is what I think about in my personal life. And to wake up every morning and have a platform with 100 million people, where if you're successful, you can build local community, that matters to me. That actually matters to me. The second thing is, I kind of love the intellectual challenges. And we have a lot of them. We don't have great product market fit currently with our product. We don't have great product market fit with our advertisers. We can do a lot better. We haven't even talked about what it's like to manage in this world. I am a CEO that was pre-COVID, pre-working remotely, pre-return to office, pre-all of these things that have happened in the world, right? So that's a massive intellectual challenge. And then finally, and probably most importantly, I really missed being part of a team.
Oh, yeah.
I really missed having people next to me to share the journey with, because I've always believed that the highs are so much higher with those people and the lows are not quite as low. And I loved being with my family and I loved spending time with my wife and I miss it. I actually miss it. But there's something about being with a like-minded group of people and pointing at a hill and saying, let's go take the hill.
Yeah.
It just gets me going.
When you can go, we did it.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's magical. It's magical.
It's magical.
You know, back in maybe it was even when I met you, it was the era of the chief happiness officer.
Yes.
And I remember going to interview them and going, what do you do? Right. And my assignment to them was find 5 people that have done something amazing in your company and ask them about what it was, right? Have them tell you the story. And I said, here's the deal. Every single story, 100% will be about something hard, right? It won't be because that was the day we had IPA instead of,
we had ice cream cake.
We had ice cream cake. That was the day that I went home and went, we did it. And we didn't think we could. And it's kind of back to that. It's a similar emotion that we were talking about earlier, right? It's that magic that happens when somebody goes, oh, you work at, or we did it, right? That's the perk everybody wants. I hear you, man. I do too.
I showed a graphic to the company yesterday at our all hands called The Emotional Journey of Creating Something Great. It's this wonderful graphic. I'll share it with you so you can put it on the website.
Okay.
And it looks like a smile, meaning on the left, it starts up high and then it dips all the way down to this bottom and then it goes back up. And the emotional journey is as follows, and we've all lived it. You start out looking at the mountain thinking, this is going to be cool. I have an amazing idea. This is going to be fun. And then you start walking towards the mountain and you say, oh, it's a little further than I thought. And then the next thing you say is,
about
are
that
we ever going to get there?
Right. Yeah.
And then the bottom of the smile is this thing called the dark swamp of despair.
Oh.
And you're in there thinking, this isn't going to work. We're not going to get there. We were idiots for thinking that this was a good idea, right? But you're in there and you're struggling and you're working and you're iterating. And if you stick with it, and if you're lucky, the smile starts to happen on the other side. And then it's like, oh, maybe we do know what we're doing. And then the next thing is, gosh, we've accomplished something. And then finally it ends with, can you believe what we've been able to do together, right? And I told the company, this is kind of the journey that we've been on since I started. I came back and people thought, oh, the founder's back. Yeah. This is amazing. We're going to create Next, which is what we call the next version of the product. And people were fired up and there was all kinds of ideas that were being generated. And yes, we can make the product better, right? And then we turn that vision into a strategy. And then we turn the strategy into a roadmap. And then we start writing code. And we realize, oh, there are a lot of things we haven't thought about.
Yep.
This is kind of hard.
Yep,
It's taking a little longer.
There's alligators in this swamp.
Users don't like it as much as we thought, right?
Uh-uh.
And so I think your point, Patty, we don't learn unless we're pushing up against something.
Mm-hmm.
We don't grow. I mean, this is literally the physics of muscle growth. You have to tear your muscles in order for them to grow back, right? The same way I know that whatever kind of CEO I am now, and I hope I'm a lot better the next time we talk on a podcast, right?
Mhm.
But whatever I am now, so much of the efficacy comes from the lack of efficacy that I viscerally felt. And I hope those listening don't have to go through the ultimate failure of being removed from their jobs. This is why it's so important to be self-aware. And it's so important to have people around the table that can give you those small failures. You don't have to have a massive, devastating, catastrophic failure, right? But sometimes it's the only thing you listen to, right?
Yeah, but there's something really inspiring about that too, Nirav.
Yeah.
I mean, what we've been preaching a lot and living a lot is like, it doesn't work out every time forever, right?
Mhm.
And oh, by the way, having it not work out is not the end of your world. It's not the end of your life. It doesn't brand you a failure forever.
Mm-mm.
It means
And
that
it doesn't
th-
even
that
mean you were a
wasn't-
failure.
Yeah, I mean, this is really inspiring for people to go, and then
Well, what do we tell our kids?
Yeah.
It's not about what happened. It's about what you're going to do next,
Mm.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and even in the company, like I had this all hands yesterday, as I mentioned, and there was something I did a month ago in the all hands that I kind of botched. And it wasn't a huge botch, but it was a botch. And I started to get some feedback. And, part of it, I was in London, I was doing it remotely. I can make a bunch of excuses, but I just wasn't on top of my game. And I said something that didn't come out the right way.
Uh-huh.
And it tortured me because I knew that I had botched it. And ultimately, I thought, I have to address this in front of the company. And I talked to a lot of other CEOs, and they said, do not apologize. Don't show weakness. Don't go up there and say you were wrong. You don't have to do that. They don't deserve that from you. And I thought to myself, but
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do.
I don't care
Yeah.
about saying I was wrong, and I don't care about saying sorry because I am sorry and I was wrong. And so I stood up and I did it. And it was a moment when I thought, in our company, I want people to feel like it's okay to make mistakes as long as we acknowledge them, we say we're sorry, and we move on.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
and
and that you learn something from
Yeah.
it. And I think, another thing that I learned in that that I advise people about a lot now is it's important to also say, not as an excuse, but here are the circumstances. So you can teach people how to say, I think you're wrong. And you can say, I was wrong, but here's what I was thinking when I made that decision. And here's what I know now that I didn't know then.
Yeah. And I think that this is, as a leader, where you win hearts and minds, right? It's being able to be vulnerable and then model the behavior that you actually want within the company, right?
Mhm.
If you do it, they will feel
everybody else
safe
will
doing
do
it.
Yes,
right?
yes,
And
absolutely.
Patty, to your point, I agree that providing the context is super valuable, but I need to share something that a good friend of mine told me yesterday, because I was telling him the story about the all hands. And he said, and I was saying to him, well, my intention was this, that, and the other thing. And I just can't believe it didn't come out the right way. And he said,
they don't
stop.
care.
He said, stop. He said, I want to give you some advice. He said, there's impact and there's intent.
Yeah.
He said, a lot of people just get completely fixated when they make a mistake on intent. He said, now I want to illustrate with example. Imagine that you're with your 2-year-old kid and you're in the kid's room and your kid's favorite rattle is on the ground and you accidentally step on it and you break it. And the kid bursts out in tears and is just beyond himself or herself. You don't go to the kid and say, oh, sorry,
didn't
that was
mean
an
to."
accident. I didn't mean to do that. My intent was not to break your rattle.
Uh-huh.
You go to the kid and you hug the kid and you say, I'm so sorry. I know you really cared about that rattle. And then
Yeah.
later on, you can say, I was clumsy. I won't do it again or whatever. Right. And it was a really interesting insight for me because I do have, I believe, good intent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's not something that I believe I need to fix. Right. But too often when something doesn't land the way I want it to, I focus on trying to rescue myself by rationalizing the intent versus really embracing the impact.
Yeah.
And leaders have to embrace the impact.
Okay. Will you indulge us with a career confession?
Absolutely.
Okay. How do I earn respect from members of my team that feel like they have seniority? For some context, I'm in my early 30s and I've been managing my current team for over a year. But there have been some issues with two older members of my team who feel like because they're a decade or more older than me, that they should be in charge and often make comments regarding having more experience, being older and wiser. I don't want them to see me as weak by raising this further, but I do want to make it clear to them that they need to respect me as their manager. So should they call this out or should they rise above?
It's a great question because
Mhm.
when I was first CEO of my first company, I was 26 and everyone who reported to me was older than me. So I went through this exact thing. I'm a big believer that you build trust by being explicit and communicating. And so I would go to those people as I did, and I would say, look, I'm obviously not the world's best CEO. I'm 26 years old, but I'm here for a reason, which is either someone hired me to do the job or I started the company or I have some capability that puts me in this role. And so let's work together. And I know that I don't know how to do your job better than you do. And I know you have 10 more years of experience, but I would like to lean on you.
No, I think that's really good advice.
The rise above it is, I think, also interesting. One of my CEO coaches used to say, I'd go to him and say, oh, this happened and this person bothered me and this and that. And the CEO coach would say, your job is to elevate. Because I would be focused on that person's wrong and I'm right. And how do I teach that person a lesson? And the CEO coach would say, elevate. Your job is to be the best version of whomever you are when something like this happens. And so on the career confession, the advice I would give about rising above it is when it comes to things that are petty and things that are kind of snarky,
Yeah.
that's where I think you rise above it. If that becomes habitual, even that I would explicitly call out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I always think Michelle Obama, I go high, you go low.
Yeah.
But I think that is very, very good advice. Elevate on the snarky stuff. But I think on the experience stuff, if you have people that have 10 more years of experience than you do, you're in your seat for a reason, but they're also in their seat for a reason. And, leaning on them and having an open conversation with them about how you can utilize them, how you can partner, how you can lean on each other is a really good conversation to have.
Yeah. And I'll say, I used to talk about maturity. Say, when we talked about you want grownups in your company. And I would say, I don't mean age, because I've known a lot of really mature, thoughtful 25-year-olds and a lot of big fat babies at 40.
Don't talk about me that way, Patty.
But it's about maturity, right? And both of those answers that you both gave are answers about maturity, right? And just because if you have 10 years of experience in something that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Right. And so I think you said it really well in this whole conversation, Nirav, which is you got to be bought into the mission. You got to, it's not just you can work anywhere you want if you have a certain level of skills and a certain level of experience. But that has to matter to what you're doing in your company for your customers that makes an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so years of experience is only years.
Yeah.
Impact is different.
Yeah. Oh, this was so fun.
It was really
Nirav.
fun.
Have I at least earned a couple of hours of consulting help
Yeah.
whenever we run into thorny
Yeah.
things?
Yeah.
I want to talk about return to office. I want
Yes,
to talk
let's do it.
Oh
about
God, we
how
did
you
too.
handle
We did.
diversity. I want to talk
Yes.
about like all of these. I mean, look, we're in a different time.
We
We
sure are.
I want to leave you. I want to leave you with one thing,
Okay.
which I wanted to share, which is a really smart person came to me and said, "Okay, you're back at Nextdoor. Let me ask you a question. You have 2 products. You realize that, right? You have 2 products you're building." And I thought to myself, what's this person talking about? Like the product I'm building for consumers and maybe the product I'm building for customers. And so I said that, and the person said, no. One product is, of course, the Nextdoor product. It's the one that everyone uses. The other product is your company. It's your culture. And you need to start thinking about that the same way you think about building the other product. There are
Yep.
bugs.
Yeah.
That's right.
There are
Yes.
features.
That's right.
There are
Yeah.
release schedules. And so
Yes.
the big thing that I realized very early when I came back to Nextdoor is that the product for consumers was stale. It had not evolved as the world evolved. What I learned shortly thereafter is the same was true of the culture. And
Yep.
so the message is we're building things and we love building things, but the apparatus that builds the thing that you are building also needs to be built. And that is
Yeah.
culture, what we think of as culture. And that can never go stale. It has to keep being current and getting better the same way your product does.
Love it.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.